video training class is going to be on adding trend history extensions to particular points in the system to add a little more functionality. So we're going to start with looking at a system here. We're going to go to this child's reading room, and just for an example, we are going to use, there's already trends on most of the points in here, but we're going to add a trend to the heating PID. So we're just going to say, for example, this room has been having trouble keeping up with the heat, and we want to be able to trend how much this PID is ramping up as we're trying to get the system to occupied mode. So in order to do this, we need to add a trend history to it, and if I open this point here, you can see there's no history under it. As there is with space temp, there's already a numeric interval, which is a history extension. Whether you're in a web system or you're on, like I'm looking at the AX software, you'll need to open a palette, and you'll see this menu right here. You'll have to open a spot that says palette, and it'll show this sidebar here. And then when we get to the palette, you're gonna hit the little folder. You're gonna scroll down and look for the history folder. And when you open your history folder, there's going to be a whole bunch of things in there, from history service, audit service, all these things that are in the history container you really don't need. The only thing we're interested in getting is the extensions, because you already have a built system. Much of this would be for someone like me that's actually programming a system. I would need to use some of those other points and pieces, but for what we're trying to do here, really the only thing you're worried about the extensions. So I'm going to explain what these extensions are real quick. A numeric interval is going to be a numeric point, and a numeric point is going to be anything like a temperature, a 0 to 100%, parts per million on a CO2 sensor, something along those lines. A numeric COV, again, is going to be a numeric point. Boolean interval, Boolean is going to be on-off. On-off, yes, no, true, false, those would be Boolean type points. An enumerated point is going to be something similar to our occupancy mode. I can show you here. On the occupancy mode, there's multiple values there, so occupied, unoccupied, bypass, and standby. That history extension can track all four of those possible positions. And then a string interval, which is typically not used in our system, you'd be trending a line of text. And sometimes on integrated type systems you might have that, but it's pretty rare, few and far between that you would ever use a string interval. Okay, so an interval is exactly that. It's just stating that it wants to take a trend every 15 minutes, or we could make this 5 minutes, 1 minute, 100 minutes, once every hour, whatever we want it to be. A numeric COV is a little bit more interesting type of point, and it's actually a lot more effective on saving memory. What we set up with this is, if it's a temperature, we say we want to trend it, but we only want to trend it if it changes by more than, we'll say, a half a degree. So if our temperature changes by more than a half a degree, it'll log it. So if we start the trend at 70, it could vary all over between 70.5 and 69.5, and it won't ever log until it crosses those thresholds. So as that temperature goes up and down, you'll see it only log in half-degree increments. Now this can be good and bad. If you have a rapidly changing point and you set your change tolerance too small, so for example like a static pressure or something like that, and I set this to 0.01, we're going to end up with a lot of variations, and you're going to end up with a ton of trend data that's going to fill up the memory very quick. So really you want to make this change tolerance fairly loose, and in most cases, especially for room type control, recording in every half a degree is probably more than adequate. Boolean, same thing. Interval, you're going to log when it turns on and off. Now there is a disadvantage to using an interval on a Boolean, because your fan or cycling, for example, on a furnace is going to turn on and off maybe every 10 or 15 minutes. If you're running on a 15-minute interval, you're going to miss and not see when that fan's actually turning on and off. You're just going to see your trend interval at 0, 15 minutes after the hour, 30 minutes after the hour. That fan could have cycled on and off 4 or 5 times in that 15-minute span. So what's better for a Boolean type point is to use Boolean COV, which is change of value, and it'll log every time there's a change in that status. Enumerated interval and COV, same way. Only change if it changes by 1, or an interval, again, you could end up with multiple changes in a particular interval. That's why I would suggest kind of against using the intervals on Boolean and enumerated. I would use COVs for those and the numeric interval, because most of the time numerics change fairly fast. I tend to do those on intervals at 5 minutes to 15 minutes. So since we want to add a trend to this heating PID, we are going to grab a numeric interval point, and all you do is click and drag, and we're going to drag it, put it right on there, and I'm not even going to change the name. I'm just going to leave it named numeric interval, and you'll see that point shows up underneath here now. Now we'll just double click it. I'm going to write down in history name. There's two ways you can do this, and I've touched on this in other videos before, but depending on how you want it to be named, in this case I'm going to be a little bit fancier with it. Parent.name is referring to the parent of this extension, so the parent would be heat PID. So when we looked in our history chart, we would be finding a point that says heat PID. Well, that's not overly useful when you have a whole bunch of heating PIDs in a building. So I want to name this parent.parent.parent. So we're going to put 3 of them there. And this is going to give us this name. It's going to say child's reading. So now we still have the same problem. We're only displaying something, only the room. We don't know what the actual point is. So then I'm going to say comma parent.name. And this is a real simple way that when we show our history, what we are going to see is child's reading room, comma space, heating PID. So now you can have a big system with a ton of these enabled trends, and you'd actually be able to pick them out logically in a trend graph. So we're going to save that point there. We're going to have it log. We're going to say every 1 minute right now, because, well, actually we're going to do about every 10 seconds, because we want to actually get some information in there as quick as we can so we can see it. The history config, this is how many record counts we can hold. So this is going to be a little bit trickier, but essentially if you take 500 times 10 seconds, that's how long of a history you're going to have here. So 500 times or 600 times 10 seconds, you'd end up with a period of time. And then as we exceed that period of time, the oldest history trends will just start dropping off, and you end up with a sliding window, essentially going back 500 or 600 trend records. So we're going to enable this trend now. And you can see it came in here and it's actually taken a trend. It's looking at the facets of the point. It's pulled all that in. It's got all the information. It's now named it. The ID of this is Plymouth Church Fan Coil Unit 1 Heating PID. I used a name. This should actually be display name. And now it'll say child's reading. Okay. So now if we want to look at this trend, a simple right click, view history chart. And since we put it on a 10-second interval and this heating PID hasn't ramped up at all, we're not seeing much change. So let's just do a quick override of it to 50%. So as you can see, it took a few minutes there, but now we've started to create our trend going up to 50%, and it'll continue doing this every 10 seconds as time goes on. So I hope that helps make sense on how you make a trend history. We're going to quickly show how going back into the history manager, we should be able to find that child's reading. So if we scroll down here, there's now a child's reading heat PID. So now we actually have that point in our chart builder, and we can use it for whatever we want. So as you can see, that's how you would add it for a numeric interval, Boolean intervals, any type of point you want. And you can easily create trends to pretty much map and troubleshoot anything you want within your system. I hope this has been helpful, and we'll continue on with creating bigger charts with more information on how to save those for future use in the next video. Thank you.